I can tell you a story about a group of teenagers who went to the forest for a picnic. They were sure that they would have a wonderful time and enjoy nature. However, their adventure turned into a nightmare. The friends chose a remote place in the depths of the forest, where they could enjoy the silence and beauty of nature. They built a fire and started cooking. But suddenly, they heard strange noises in the surroundings. They looked around and saw that the darkness had become thicker, and the forest was quiet. The teenagers felt an inexplicable fear that was getting stronger. They heard the gnashing of branches and the rustling of bushes. Someone or something was approaching them. They tried to calm down and focus on the fire, but then they noticed that something was moving around them. Soon they noticed a shadow that slid past them. They looked in that direction and saw an unfamiliar man. He seemed like a stranger, but his face was hidden behind a hood. He walked past them and disappeared into the darkness. The teenagers felt that it was something sinister. Their fear and anxiety only intensified. They decided to pack up and leave the place. But then they discovered that their car was not working. They were trapped in the forest. The darkness was getting thicker by the minute, and they felt that something sinister and incomprehensible was watching them. They heard strange sounds and noises that came from the depths of the forest. They understood that they were not alone in this forest. Teenagers began to wander through the forest, trying to find a way out. They walked for hours, but could not find any traces of civilization. They felt lost and helpless. Their fears and anxiety only increased with each step. Eventually, they found an old cabin in the woods. They decided that this could be their salvation, and decided to go inside. But when they entered, they found that the cabin was abandoned and neglected. It was filled with dark secrets and sinister secrets. Teenagers started exploring the house and found a lot of strange things. They found an old diary that described the murders and atrocities that took place in this house. They knew they were trapped. They understood that they were trapped and had to leave this house as soon as possible. But then they heard footsteps outside the door. They froze in horror and began to look for a way out of this situation. They decided to hide in the basement of the house to hide from the mysterious visitor. They went downstairs and closed the door behind them. But then they heard someone start knocking on the door. They couldn't understand what was going on and felt even more lost and helpless. They understood that something sinister and terrible was happening in this house, and they needed to get out of here as soon as possible. The teenagers started looking for a way out of the basement, but then they found a secret room that was locked. They decided to try to open it, but then they heard someone start coming to the door. They froze in horror and began to look for a way to get out of the secret room. And then they discovered an old tunnel that led into the depths of the earth. They decided that this might be their only chance of survival and began to climb down. They descended many meters down and finally got to the surface. They understood that they were on the other side of the forest, and they had to get to civilization as soon as possible. They walked for hours through the forest and finally found the road that led to the city. They were exhausted and scared, but they were alive. They decided never to go to the forest for a picnic again and try to avoid places where they might be in danger. This story reminds us that our world is full of secrets and dangers, and that we must always be careful and vigilant in any situation. We don't know what's hiding behind a bend in the road, or what might happen in a dark forest. but we must always remain alert and ready for any circumstances.
One day, on a dark autumn night, the main character named Maxim decided to go on a long trip through a remote forest. We had to drive through narrow paths, surrounded by dense trees that seemed alive and gloomy in the dark. Maxim was tired after a long working week and his attention gradually began to weaken. Suddenly, on a turn, his car lost control and flew off the road, crashing into a tree. A strong blow plunged Maxim into semi-consciousness. When he came to his senses, there was absolute darkness around. The only light source is a weak ray of the moon penetrating through dense foliage. Everything seemed strange and incomprehensible, and Maxim realized that he was lost in the forest. He got out of the car to look around. In the distance, strange sounds could be heard, similar to the rustling and moaning of trees. A sense of danger gripped Maxim, but he had to continue to seek help. As he moved deeper into the forest, the surrounding atmosphere became more and more frightening. The trees seemed alive and moving, as if they were watching his every move. The noise of the wind resembled shrill screams, and the darkness absorbed its suspicious sounds and turned them into mystical whispers. Finally, Maxim heard a faint light, and his heart beat with relief. But as he approached, the fear gripped him more and more. It was an abandoned hut, covered with cobwebs and littered with branches and leaves. Maxim decided to enter the hut, hoping to find help there or at least hide from the night. There was an atmosphere of abandonment and horror inside. The walls were covered with mold, creaked under every step, and the air was saturated with the smell of rot. He heard a rustle behind him and turned around, but saw no one. Visions and ominous voices began to appear in his head. Fear gripped him completely, and he realized that the forest has a living and sinister spirit. Suddenly, the darkness parted, and a figure in a black cloak appeared in front of Maxim. He was a local old sorcerer known for his evil rituals. He regarded Maxim with a smirk on his face and uttered unintelligible words in an incomprehensible language. Maxim realized that he had fallen into a trap and began trying to get out of this nightmare. He decided to use all his strength and skills to resist the sorcerer. Maxim quickly realized that the only way to survive was to overcome his fear and gather his thoughts. He remembered that the forest can be dangerous, but it does not have magical power by itself. Maxim began to run through dense thickets and jump over fallen trees. He could hear the sorcerer chasing him, uttering terrible screams and uttering incomprehensible spells. However, Maxim was not going to give up. He found a small river that flowed through the forest and decided to use it to his advantage. Maxim swam across the river and realized that the water was sacred to the sorcerer. He could not cross it and fell behind Maxim. Knowing that time was working against him, Maxim continued to run until he came out into the open. He saw the headlights of cars on the road and realized that salvation was near. Finally, he got out of the forest and found himself on a safe road. Maxim stopped the first car he met and asked for help. The driver called an ambulance, and Maxim was taken to the hospital. After this nightmare, Maxim realized that the forest can be a dangerous and mysterious place. He decided not to take any more risks and to avoid trips to the backwoods at night. He also realized that willpower and determination can help overcome fear and survive in the darkest and most dangerous situations.